All right. Well, can you tell me a little bit about your childhood growing up in Westchester in the 1950s?
Yeah, it was an idyllic time, 1950s. We lived out at Westchester, Illinois, on a street called Manchester. Our house was 1436 Manchester, and it was a 3 bedroom, 2 bathroom house. And we must have moved there when I was about, I'd say, uh, 7 or 8, I suppose. And then I went to Nixon School, which was the local public school in the area. And I can remember back to my 3rd grade teacher, Mrs. Strite. And then I was there through going into high school. So I was there through grades, say, 3 through 8th. And I had good teachers there. I had friends there, lived in the neighborhood. I used to ride my bicycle to school. And then after school would participate in sports programs that the at Nixon School offered. So I can remember playing basketball primarily, starting I think when I was in 6th grade, and that would have made me 11 years old, 6th grade, and then I played on the team, what they called the heavyweight team, when I was in 7th and 8th grade. And they divided 2 teams, lightweights and heavyweights. If you weighed under 105 pounds, you were lightweight. If you weighed over 105 pounds, you were on the heavyweight team.
So, before you go any further, I guess I'm forgetting a pretty important part. In Berwyn, where you first lived and grew up, and got polio, we should probably talk about those years and your earliest memories, and the whole polio episode and how that might have been formative.
Okay. So let's see. In Berwyn, we lived in an apartment building where there were 3 floors. We lived, I think, on the top floor, and then my grandmother, who owned the building, she lived on the bottom floor, and then her daughter, my Aunt Harriet, lived on the 2nd floor apartment in that building in Berwyn. And I had a cousin named David that, in fact, I had 2 cousins, David and Charles. Charles was much younger, but David was a year younger than I, and so we would play together all the time. But I guess when I was about 3 or 4, I did contract polio. And that was my earliest memories are basically lying in bed, and I was in bed for about a year. Didn't do anything, and so the bed became my playground, and I had a kind of a vivid inner life, you might say, and that has impacted me my whole life. You know, I'm comfortable with being by myself, being alone. I can go into a imaginary world if and when I want to. But the polio affected my left leg, where my left leg and my left foot were smaller than my right leg, and it affected my right shoulder. And so those are 2 weak parts of my body. So I tried to compensate in sports as much as I could, but I did have a basic weakness of my left leg, so I could only do so much athletically. I mean, I think I did as much as I could, but I never got into weightlifting. I used to use a metal boot, you might say, on my left leg to try and strengthen the muscles in my left leg, and I did that for a while, for a couple of years. But that was the impact on me. The polio was disease then that they didn't really have at that point. They didn't have the cure for it. The vaccine for it came out just afterwards. So that was my era of polio. I remember just lying in bed that whole time, and my mother took great care of me. She used to wash me in hot, scalding water just to move my muscles. And so I remember got a hot, scalding bath every day of my life, or during that period, just so I could move my muscles and didn't become complete invalid. So that was a period there.
Do you think that impacted your personality in any way?
Oh, sure, yeah. Impacted absolutely. It made me made me reliant upon myself. As I say, it didn't affect me. I mean, I didn't need to be around others. I could be by myself, and I think it made me attentive to be around women who would pay some attention to me and kind of take care of me. So I kind of gravitated towards women like that in my life. As a result of that experience, because I became very close with my mother, and during that period of time, and then that's what happened. And then my brother was born 5 years, 5 years later. In other words, I would have been. I guess I would have just been getting over polio period when my brother was born.
So you mentioned your mother. Tell us a little about your mother, what you remember, and what she was like, her personality.
Oh, my mother's name was Alice Elliott, and her maiden name was Randall. She came from an Irish family. She had a lot of brothers and sisters. I remember her father, who was named Owen Randall, and he worked as a carpenter in Chicago. And so I remember that. She was close with him. At one time, he came out to our home in Westchester and completed the basement in our house. So we spent a couple months living and working and rehabbing the basement that they had, so we could live down there, and became an extra room in the house. But she was a vivacious, exuberant, wonderful woman. She had red hair, blue eyes, curvaceous, and full of life. And let's see, her brothers and sisters that I was close to, I guess I remember her sister Anna Mae, who had a farm up in Wisconsin. So she was close to Anna Mae, and then she had an older sister named Marie, and she had a brother named Jack Randall, and she had another brother named Owen Randall, who lived in Kalamazoo, Michigan. So she had 2 brothers and 2 sisters. But she was a dominant influence to my life all through my early years. In fact, until she passed away, she died early. She died of ovarian cancer when she was 49, and I guess that had a big impact on me, because I was at the university. I would have been probably around 20 years old, and so that had a big impact on my life when she passed away.
What was the impact?
Well, I remember when she got sick, she went into the hospital, and then I went to visit her on one of my spring breaks, and She had lost a lot of weight. She became almost a skeleton, and I didn't recognize her when I came into the room. She was so thin, and you could tell that she was fighting for her life. And so then I realized that she might die, and so that really had a big big impact on me. And it in fact it caused me to get married to my first wife, who was named Beth, because I returned uh, back to the university by train. And so on this train ride, I was feeling bad, and then this girl Beth was on the same train ride coming back, and so we got to talking, and so that was kind of helped. I kind of unburdened myself on her, and then we became close after that, and ultimately got married about 3 years later. And I think that was the catalyst for me to approach this girl and to kind of get to know her.
Would you say there? Can you think of one um, incident or episode with Alice that would be kind of representative of her personality?
Representative of her personality. Well, she was very protective towards us, me and my brother, and so I mean, if we ever had any problems with other people, she would get involved, and she was very protective towards us. Always wanted the best for us, and she was always there. You could always count on her if something came up.
And how about your dad?
Well, my father was more silent, more in the background. He was always there, and they got along pretty good together, my mother and my father, and he just was kind of a constant influence in my life, a stable influence, and used to work 5.5 days a week. He'd go in on Saturday and come back have lunch, get back about 1 o'clock, but he did that for years and years, and we had a very, call it a stable upbringing. I mean, there were routines, and so I say during the period of the 1950s in Westchester was now I realize it was a period it was a golden age almost. I mean, there weren't any real problems. I mean, we just would go out and play every day and enjoy ourselves, basically.
What did you play at? What games in the neighborhood?
Well, let's see. I say I gravitated towards a lot of sports, so we would play baseball, football, basketball. There was usually some type of athletics involved. We once in a while I had a girl living down at the end of the block named Connie Scanlon, and she used to come over with a friend of hers named Gay Tam, and they would want to play marbles with me in the backyard, so we'd shoot marbles. So that was a game that we played, but we didn't play any no real card games that I recall. But I do recall the period of marbles when two girls would get dressed up, and then we could go back and play in a muddy backyard marbles. So that comes to mind.
Speaking of your father, were there any incidents or moments that sort of typified his personality?
Well, he worked in a small company called R.S. Bacon Veneer Company. He did sales for R.S. Bacon Veneer Company, selling veneer all around the world. And so he had a boss named, or I should say a partner named George Wilhelm, and he was married to Ann Wilhelm, and they used to come over maybe once a month to our home for like a party. We'd have people coming over on a Saturday night, and so they would come, and they were gregarious. George was gregarious, and Anne was a school teacher in Oak Park, and she was very nice. But my father did the best that he could to entertain them on a regular basis.
Tell me a little bit more about Nixon Grade School. Your teachers that were influential on you there, and you know, ways in which Nixon might have been formative in your upbringing.
Well, let's see. It was, I see, a fairly stable environment. We had very middle class. The all the other students were from similar backgrounds as myself. I guess one teacher that had an impact was Tony Socek. He was a coach, so he was the gym teacher and coach there. And so, since I was involved in after school curricular activities, athletics, he coached. Well, I know he coached basketball, and I don't remember if he coached football or not, but he coached the basketball team, and so that was a big sport going from November up through March or April. So I remember being around him every day. Then there was in 8th grade, I had a teacher named Mrs. Hartley. That was her name, and she was famous to me because her husband was named Joe Hartley, who was a basketball coach, first at Proviso East and then over at Proviso West. And so those were the high schools in the area. So she was a teacher, and then let's see, I had a Mr. Albert, who was a science teacher, so he was a nice guy. So I remember Mrs. Hartley and Mr. Albert in particular.
Anything else that you can recall about Nixon?
No, those are some of the main things right there. We used to have dances, I think, every Friday night, where we would go there and they'd have a little dance at the school. So that was popular during my 7th and 8th grades. That's when I started noticing girls because they had, as I say, they had that dance every Friday night.
And what about Proviso West? Tell me about your experiences at Proviso West High School and the influences on your upbringing there, those 4 years.
Well, Proviso West was a new school in the area. It was in Hillside, and it had a sister school called Proviso East, which was located in Maywood. And Proviso East was an integrated school where there were a lot of black students there at Proviso East. And Proviso West was lily white. It was a brand new school, and I don't think there were any black children there. It was not integrated, and being a new school, everything was new in the school. And I remember I was selected when I was in 8th grade. They had a selection of 30 students, and so I was in special class my freshman year at Proviso West with these 30 students who were selected in the area because of good academic backgrounds. That broke up after my 2nd year at Proviso West, but I was with those 30 students the first year. And then again, I did the sports, so I did the basketball and baseball all 4 years at Proviso West High School. And so that provided me with kind of a basic routine where I'd go to school till 3 o'clock and then practice from 4 to 6 and get back home about 6:30 or 7, eat, and then do homework from say 7:30 to 9:30 and be in bed at 10 and up at 6 to take the school bus there. And then when I was my senior year in high school, I had a friend who named Mike Halaka who would come and pick me up in his car. So he would make the rounds and pick up 3 or 4 boys in Westchester, and he was the only one that had a car, and then he drove us to school.
Thinking back for 1 minute on Nixon, you were elected student council president. How did that happen? Why did you even run for that?
Yeah, that's strange. I don't know how or why I ran for it, but I did run for it, and I was elected student council president. And I remember at that time I was really afraid to make a speech in public, and so I had to work on it to overcome the shyness of making a speech in public. And so that was my big reflection on that. I don't remember much about the dynamics of being president, but I do remember the fear that I had for making a speech in public, for public speaking, but then finally overcoming it just by practicing over and over, and looking into a mirror and practicing whatever I had to say into a mirror.
Why do you think you were popular? I mean, the election is kind of a popularity contest. Did you feel have any sense at the time you were popular?
Yeah, I know I was popular. Uh-huh. I know the other guys liked me because I was good at sports, and the girls liked me because I was nice and polite to them. And so, yeah, I was popular. And it carried over. I maintained the popularity then kind of throughout my schooling days, so to speak.
At Proviso West, do you recall any specific teachers or coaches who had a real impact on you? Influence?
Well, let's see. There was a English teacher named Glenn Rudmuller that I remember was a good English teacher. He was an ex-Marine. I only found that out years later, but he was a good teacher, had an influence on me. There was another English teacher named Art Levin, who was a good teacher that I can remember enjoying his classes. There was a basketball coach named Bernie Skull that I remember having an impact on me. There was the basketball coach, Joe Hartley, whose wife I had as an 8th grade teacher, math teacher. And so he was, I remember him. Let's see, any other teachers? So those are about the teachers that come to mind quickly.
And then Lawrence University in Appleton, Wisconsin. Can you talk a little bit about how you chose that and your experience there?
Well, let's see. Then when I was a senior in high school, I wanted to go to the university, and I looked around. At first I was interested in Northern Illinois University. And so I looked up there and went to visit that university and found it to be pretty big. And so I had heard about Lawrence because it was in the what they call the Midwest Conference, and it was called the Harvard of the Midwest, in fact. So they had pretty good academic reputation, and so I was curious to take a look at it, and I had some high school friends who were also considering Lawrence. So I had a friend named Michael Fallon. In fact, he went up there to that Lawrence University. Another friend named Dave Poteet, who went up to that university. I had another friend named Dana Zidek, who went up to that university. So I had friends from high school who also were interested in that university, and so we all went up there. And I mean, I went up to visit it, and it was just a small school. There were 2,500 students, and up in Appleton, Wisconsin, and it was kind of a little community all of its own. And everyone was friendly, everyone was smart. They had athletics that I could participate in, and I remember I got a half scholarship there, so I got kind of a scholarship that paid for half my studies because of athletics and academics, and so that also had an impact on my going up there because for the family it was expensive, but when we could get half of it paid, that made it less expensive. So that was Lawrence University. Then, of course, to get up there, I had to take a train ride up there, and the train ride was about 3 or 4 hours going from Chicago up to Appleton. And then my freshman year at Appleton, I lived in what was called Brokaw Hall, and I had a roommate named Tony that I didn't see very often because he lived locally. So I lived on a floor in Brokaw Hall, and that's where I met one of my friends there named Kit Vernon. He was on that same floor, so we were friendly. He was from Evanston, and so we used to play athletics together. So we play football, basketball, baseball at Lawrence, and then at the end of my freshman year at Lawrence, I went into a fraternity, and I pledged what they called Beta Theta Pi. That was the fraternity that I pledged, and they had 6 fraternities on campus. They had what was called the Quad, and the Quad had 6 buildings or 6 fraternities where the boys would live in the house, and they'd live and eat in the house. And so I was in Beta Theta Pi. Then the house next to us was called Sigma Phi Epsilon. The house on the other side was called Delta Tau Delta, and then let's see, Phi Delta Theta. Anyway, there were the six fraternities, and then they all had their own athletics going. There's a league there, and so I got involved in playing sports for all the fraternities, and that was a lot of fun. I mean, the guys were a lot of fun in the fraternity, and it was a good experience.
And did you maintain friendships with some of your frat brothers?
Yeah, I still am in contact with. Let's see, Kit Vernon was the most recent one, but he's the one that I've stayed in contact with through the years because he's an old friend, and that's about it. I didn't stay in contact with many others, but now that we're talking about it, maybe I'll look them up. I'm curious to see what happened to them, if I can find them. I know that a friend of mine, Dana Zidek, he moved out to Colorado, and so he moved out there. Oh yeah, I'm in contact with Michael Fallon. Of course, he was not a fraternity brother, but he was a friend from high school that I had who went to Lawrence for 2 years, and then he dropped out because he got married. But I still see him on a regular basis. He lives down here in this area, Michael Fallon.
Can you talk a little bit about your memorable classes or teachers there at Lawrence, and also how you ended up majoring in psychology and why?
Well, I had a course at Proviso West in psychology my senior year. It was with Mr. McAllister. And so he was a good teacher, McAllister, and so I enjoyed psychology at that semester I had at Proviso West. And then when I went to the university, I took general topics of interest my first 2 years. So they had what they called freshman studies, which exposed you to all different topics. And then I slowly moved towards interest in psychology. There was not one teacher. I mean, there were the psychology teachers at Lawrence were good teachers, but I mean, not one really had a big impact on me. Uh, there were no teachers there that had a big impact on me, but it was just the overall quality of the professors there were all very good, and so they kept my interest, you might say. So that's what got me involved in psychology.
You've traveled to many countries around the world. Can you talk a little bit about the places you've been and the places you've seen and some of your favorites and why?
Well, let's see. In traveling, I starting off in the USA. I moved from the Chicago area out to Boston, and so I lived in the Boston area for about 5 years, and then from Boston, I moved on to New York City, Manhattan. Lived there for about 4 years, and that's where I met Francoise, who was my ex-wife, French girl, and we had when we got married, I had an offer to work for a consulting company, a U.S. consulting company, which had a project in Algeria. So I decided to take that project in Algeria, and was my first movement overseas. And so we went over to Algeria, working with Sonatrach, which is a large nationalized oil and gas company in Algeria. And at that time, Francoise was pregnant with our first child, Benjamin, and she worked also with the company for 3 months, and then we didn't want to have the baby born in Algeria because we weren't too comfortable with the medical practices in Algeria. So we decided to get an apartment in Mallorca, which is an island in Spain. And so I would commute then. I would fly home on Friday night to Mallorca, spend Friday night there, Saturday, and then on Sunday I'd fly back to Algeria and spend the week in Algeria. And Francoise would stay in Mallorca, which was a nice, it was a great island, and we lived in a place called Portos Deuce. But they had good doctors there, and I remember Benjamin was born in Mallorca. And then about 6 months after the birth of Benjamin, there was a coup d'état in Algeria, and so we lost the project. In other words, the project was stopped by the government, and so I had no job, and so we decided to, at that time, Mallorca was wonderful, but I decided to there wasn't any work in Mallorca, but we decided to move to Geneva, Switzerland, because Francoise had worked in Geneva previous to coming to Manhattan, where I met her. So we bought a car, an old Simca car, and packed it up with all our belongings, and then we put the car on the ship and took the ship to Barcelona, and then took the car off the ship in Barcelona, and then drove from Barcelona up to Geneva, Switzerland, and set up shop in Geneva, Switzerland. So when we got there, she had a friend named Catherine, who was living there, and so the two of them were friendly, and so then we happened to find a house to rent just over the border into France in a place called Champs-Élysées. So we rented a house there, and then I worked in Geneva. In my first job in Geneva, I met this fella named Charles Pierre in Geneva who was involved in selling various products. And so, we became friendly, and then he realized I didn't have anything, so he made me an English teacher for his staff. And so he had about 3 or 4 people working for him that he wanted them to learn English. So I would work half a day teaching them English. So that was my first job in in Geneva. And then from there, I worked as call it a consultant. I would work with different entrepreneurs who usually would get a consulting project and would be looking for consultants to execute the project. And so then that's when I started with the travels, because I got a job there. The next big one that I can remember was with a consulting assignment in Saudi Arabia. So I went down to Saudi Arabia, and it was working with a company called the Allied Medical Group, who had a hospital down there in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, and I was involved in trying to bring some order to that, because it was pretty wild when we went down there. Uh, so that was my first consulting assignment, was with the Allied Medical Group in Saudi Arabia. And then I would usually go down, say, for a couple weeks, and then come back to Geneva for a couple weeks. And I did the next. I had a consulting job over in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia, with a bank. And so then I got to see the area down there. So I went from Saudi Arabia over to Bahrain, and saw Bahrain, and then I went from Bahrain over to Egypt, spent some time in Cairo, Egypt, kind of checking that out. So that was my first movement internationally. It was in the Middle East, and then as the years went on, I developed a business in Geneva, which was I ultimately developed a franchise business where I was selling franchises. So I remember I had one person, an ex-student of mine, because at that time in Geneva I was a professor at Webster University, teaching different courses, and I had one student who organized for me to give a lecture out in Singapore. And at that time I had 2 franchises going. I had what was called the World Wide Web Institute, which was a training franchise, and then I had IBC, Internet Business Center, which was an e-commerce franchise. So I went out to Singapore, and my job was to just to present these 2 franchises. And so I talked about them, and I got some press in the local, and I came away with people who wanted to buy the franchise. So I had one group that wanted to buy the World Wide Web Institute, and then I had a second group that wanted to buy the Internet Business Center. And one group for the World Wide Web Institute was in India, and so I had, call it a partner, who wanted the Indian market, and then I had the IBC was a partner who wanted the Chinese market. So I had a Singaporean partner who wanted to spread around the franchises in China. So that's what got started really internationally.